He never believed in guardian angels until two identical soldiers appeared at his coffee shop on the worst night of his life, both claiming the same impossible thing: "We've been watching over you." Dorian Thorne was just a struggling single father trying to keep his small-town cafe afloat when Jade and Sky Reed walked through his doors during a violent thunderstorm, soaked to the bone and carrying military duffel bags that seemed far too heavy for their slight frames. What they said next would shatter everything he thought he knew about his past. The twin sisters insisted they weren't strangers. They were his protectors, sent to guard him from a danger he didn't even know existed. When Dorian demanded proof, they handed him a classified military file with his name on it, containing secrets about his family that had been buried for decades. What began as a mysterious encounter soon became a journey of shocking revelations, supernatural connections, and a bond that defied all logic. Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come disguised as ordinary people with extraordinary purposes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The bell above the door of Copper Ridge Cafe had been broken for 3 months, but Dorian Thorne couldn't afford to fix it. Every morning at 5 a.m., he flipped the sign from closed to open and pretended the silence didn't bother him. The small coffee shop sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, wedged between a dusty antique store and a barbershop that only opened on weekends. It wasn't much: 12 mismatched tables, a counter that wobbled when you leaned on it, and an espresso machine that required a prayer and 2 firm taps to function properly, but it was his. Dorian had inherited the cafe from his aunt 3 years ago, along with a mountain of debt and a building that seemed determined to fall apart one repair at a time. The roof leaked when it rained, the heating system worked only when it felt like it, and the old wooden floors creaked like a ship in a storm. But it was home to him and his 10-year-old son, Easton, who did his homework at the corner table every afternoon while Dorian served coffee to the handful of regulars who kept them afloat. Life in Copper Ridge moved at the pace of molasses. The town nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered in pine and oak, where everyone knew everyone else's business and strangers were noticed before they'd even parked their cars. Most days, Dorian served the same dozen customers: Mrs. Henley with her sugar-free vanilla latte, Old Pete who nursed a black coffee for 2 hours while reading the same newspaper twice, and the Miller twins who shared a blueberry muffin every Tuesday like clockwork. It wasn't the life Dorian had planned. 6 years ago, he'd been an architect in Portland, married to Sarah, designing modern homes with floor-to-ceiling windows and sustainable materials. They'd had dreams: travel, a bigger family, maybe a house overlooking the ocean. Then came the diagnosis: stage 4 pancreatic cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. Sarah fought for 18 months with a strength that humbled everyone who knew her, but the cancer fought harder. After the funeral, Dorian packed up their Portland life, took Easton, and moved to Copper Ridge because it was the only place he could afford to start over. Some days were harder than others. Today was shaping up to be one of the hard ones. Morning had started with a call from Easton's school about unpaid lunch fees. Then the coffee supplier called to say their account was past due, and if payment wasn't received by Friday, deliveries would stop. Dorian had spent his lunch break hunched over the cafe's ancient computer, moving money between accounts like a financial shell game, trying to make $30 stretch far enough to cover both bills. It didn't work. Math had never been his strong suit, but lately, it seemed determined to prove him wrong at every turn. By evening, the cafe was empty except for Easton, who sat at his usual table surrounded by math worksheets and colored pencils. The boy had his mother's dark hair and serious eyes, but he'd inherited Dorian's tendency to worry about things beyond his control. At 10, he already understood more about their financial situation than any young person should, offering to skip movie nights and asking if they really needed new sneakers when his old ones still mostly fit. Outside, The sky had been threatening. Rain all day, and by 7 o'clock, it made good on its promise. The storm arrived like an unwelcome visitor, battering the windows with fat raindrops and sending autumn leaves swirling down the empty street. Dorian flipped the cafe sign to closed and began his nightly routine, wiping down tables, counting the day's meager earnings, and pretending he wasn't worried about tomorrow. That's when he saw them. 2 figures stood pressed against the cafe's front window, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass. At first, Dorian thought they might be teenagers seeking shelter, but as they stepped closer to the light, he realized they were women young, identical, and soaked to the bone. They wore military uniforms, their dark hair plastered to their heads, and each carried a heavy duffel bag that seemed to weigh more than they did. Dorian hesitated. The cafe was closed, and he had a policy about not letting strangers in after hours, especially with Easton present. But something about the way they stood there, not knocking or demanding entry, just waiting, made him reconsider. They looked lost, exhausted, and utterly harmless despite their military bearing. He unlocked the door and pulled it open, immediately hit by a gust of cold wind and rain. "We're closed," he said, then caught himself. "But come in, you'll catch pneumonia." Out there. The twin women exchanged a glance, a quick, wordless communication that identical siblings seemed to perfect in the womb. The first one stepped inside, followed by her mirror image. Up close, they were even more striking. High cheekbones, piercing green eyes, and an otherworldly quality that made Dorian feel like he was looking at something not quite human. "Thank you," the first woman said, her voice soft but carrying an unusual accent he couldn't place. "I'm Jade Reed, and this is my sister Sky." Sky nodded but didn't speak, her eyes scanning the cafe with the careful attention of someone trained to notice details. Both women moved with a fluid grace that spoke of military training, but there was something else, an alertness that went beyond professional vigilance. "Dorian Thorne," he replied, grabbing 2 towels from behind the counter. "This is my son, Easton." Easton looked up from his homework, eyes wide with curiosity. The boy had always been fascinated by anything out of the ordinary, and twin soldiers definitely qualified. "We know," Jade said simply, accepting the towel with a grateful nod. Dorian froze. "You know?" Sky finally spoke, her voice identical to her sister's, but somehow carrying a different weight. "We've been looking for you, Dorian Thorne. We've been watching over you for a very long time." The words hit Dorian like a physical blow. Watching over him? He'd never seen these women before in his life, and Copper Ridge was too small for strangers to go unnoticed for long. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Jade and Sky exchanged another one of their wordless glances. Then Jade reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and bearing official military seals. She set it on the nearest table with the reverence of someone handling something sacred. "No confusion," she said quietly. "We're your guardian angels, Dorian. And it's time you knew the truth about why you needed protection." The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Dorian stared at the folder, then at the 2 women who had appeared in his cafe like characters from a dream he couldn't remember having. Nothing in his ordinary life had prepared him for this moment, but somehow, looking into their otherworldly green eyes, he knew everything was about to change. Thunder rolled across Copper Ridge, and with it, the first crack in the foundation of everything Dorian thought he knew about his life. Dorian stared at the manila folder as if it might explode. The official seals and stamps looked real enough, but the whole situation felt like something out of a fever dream. Guardian angels? Military files with his name on them? He glanced at Easton, who had abandoned his homework entirely and was watching the proceedings with the fascination of a 10-year-old witnessing magic. "Dad?" Easton's voice was small, uncertain. "Are they really angels?" The question hung in the air like incense. Jade and Sky remained perfectly still, water dripping from their uniforms onto the cafe's worn wooden floors. They didn't look like angels, at least not the kind with flowing robes and golden halos that Easton had seen in picture books. They looked like soldiers, tired and human, and very much in need of a hot meal and dry clothes. Dorian's first instinct was to ask them to leave. His life was complicated enough without adding mysterious twin sisters claiming supernatural protection duties. But something in their eyes stopped him, a combination of exhaustion and determination that reminded him of Sarah during her final months, when she'd fought for every day, not because she believed she could win, but because the fight itself mattered. "You're soaked through," he said finally, making his choice. "And you look like you haven't eaten in days." It wasn't an acceptance of their claims, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was simply human kindness, the kind Sarah had taught him by example, the kind he wanted Easton to learn by watching. Jade's shoulders sagged slightly, as if she'd been holding her breath. "We don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Dorian interrupted, already moving toward the kitchen. "Easton, can you grab some of Mom's old clothes from the storage room upstairs? They should fit." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Easton nodded eagerly and bounded up the narrow staircase that led to their small apartment above the cafe. Dorian had kept several boxes of Sarah's belongings, unable to donate them, but unwilling to look at them every day. Tonight, for the first time in years, they would serve a purpose beyond preserving memories. "Thank you," Sky said quietly. It was only the second time she'd spoken, and Dorian noticed her voice carried a slight tremor. Whether from cold or emotion, he couldn't tell. "Don't thank me yet," Dorian replied, firing up the old gas stove. "My cooking isn't exactly five-star quality." He pulled ingredients from the refrigerator: leftover chicken, some vegetables that were still good, rice from yesterday's dinner. It wasn't much, but it would make a decent soup. As he worked, he was acutely aware of the twins watching him with an intensity that went beyond polite interest. It was as if they were memorizing every detail: the way he chopped onions with practiced efficiency, how he seasoned the broth by taste rather than measurement, the careful attention he paid to each element of the meal. "You cook like someone who's fed a lot of people," Jade observed. Dorian glanced up from the pot. "Sarah, my wife, she was the real cook. I just learned enough to keep Easton from starving after she..." He didn't finish the sentence. He never knew how to finish that sentence. "She died," Sky said gently. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago." The wooden spoon slipped from Dorian's hand, clattering against the stove. He turned slowly to face the twins, his heart hammering against his ribs. "How could you possibly know that?" "We told you," Jade said simply. "We've been watching over you." "That's impossible. I would have noticed, would you?" Sky tilted her head, studying him with those unsettling green eyes. "Tell me, Dorian, how many times in the past 3 years have you had a close call? A near miss that should have been much worse?" Dorian opened his mouth to say there hadn't been any, then stopped. There was the time his car had skidded on black ice last winter, spinning across both lanes of traffic without hitting anything despite the rush hour crush. The morning he'd forgotten to turn off the gas stove and come downstairs to find it mysteriously shut off. The afternoon, a tree branch had fallen across the exact spot where he'd been standing just moments before, missing him by inches. "Coincidences," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Interventions," Jade corrected. Easton's footsteps thundered down the stairs, breaking the tense moment. He carried an armful of clothes, jeans, sweaters, socks that still smelled faintly of Sarah's lavender perfume. The boy's face was flushed with excitement, as if he'd been entrusted with a secret mission. "These should fit," he announced, distributing the clothes between the twins. "Mom was about your size, I think." Jade accepted the bundle with reverence. holding the soft blue sweater as if it were made of spun gold. "These belong to your mother?" Easton nodded proudly. "Dad keeps all her things. He says it's not goodbye if you remember right." The twins exchanged another of their wordless looks, this one heavy with meaning Dorian couldn't interpret. When they looked back at him, their eyes were suspiciously bright. "Your husband has raised a wise young man," Sky said to the empty air, as if Sarah might be listening. The comment sent a chill down Dorian's spine. There was something about the way she'd said it, not to Easton or even to Dorian himself, but to someone who wasn't there. Or someone only they could see. "The bathroom's down the hall," he managed. "Take your time, soup should be ready in 20 minutes. As the twins gathered the clothes and disappeared down the hallway, Dorian found himself alone with his son and 1,000 questions. Easton had returned to his homework, but kept glancing toward the manila folder on the table. "Are you going to look at it?" the boy asked. Dorian followed his gaze to the folder. The official seals seemed to gleam under the cafe's warm lights, promising answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. But answers he'd learned sometimes changed everything. And he wasn't sure he was ready for everything to change again. "Maybe," he said finally, "after we make sure they're okay." It was a deflection, and they both knew it. But it was also a choice to put human compassion before curiosity, to offer shelter before demanding explanations. In that moment, watching steam rise from the soup pot while rain battered the windows, Dorian made the first conscious decision to trust these strange women who claimed to be his protectors. He didn't know it yet, but it was the decision that would save all their lives. The twins emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, transformed. In Sarah's clothes, with their hair dried and loosely braided, they looked less like soldiers and more like young women who'd been carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. Jade wore the blue sweater Easton had chosen, while Sky had selected a forest green cardigan that brought out her eyes. "Better?" Dorian asked, ladling soup into mismatched bowls. "Much," Jade replied, settling into a chair at the table. "Thank you. For the clothes, for the food, for..." She gestured around the warm cafe. "For not calling us crazy and throwing us back into the storm." Dorian set bowls before each of them, noting how they waited until he and Easton were seated before taking their first spoonful. Military training, probably, but it felt more like respect. "The night's still young," he said with a weak smile. "You haven't told me what's in that folder yet." Sky's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Are you sure you want to know?" Dorian looked at his son, who was watching the proceedings with rapt attention, then at the twins who'd appeared out of a storm claiming to be his guardians. Nothing about this situation made sense, but somehow, sitting in his warm cafe sharing soup with these mysterious women, it felt right. "No," he said honestly. "But I think I need to know anyway." Jade reached for the folder with steady hands, her fingers tracing the official seals one final time before breaking them open. "Then it's time you learned the truth about who you really are, Dorian Thorne, and why your family has needed protection for the past 30 years. The manila folder lay open on the table between them, but Dorian found himself studying the twins instead of the documents. In Sarah's borrowed clothes, with color returning to their cheeks and soup warming their bellies, Jade and Sky looked less like mysterious soldiers and more like young women who'd been traveling far too long without rest. The military bearing was still there, the straight spines, the way they kept their hands visible on the table, the subtle alertness that never quite faded, but underneath it was something softer, more vulnerable. "Before we dive into all of this," Dorian said, gesturing toward the folder, "when's the last time either of you actually slept? And I mean really slept, not whatever passes for rest in the military." Jade and Sky exchanged one of their wordless looks. It was Sky who answered, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. "It's been a while." "Define a while." 72 hours, Jade admitted, give or take. Dorian set down his spoon with a sharp clink. 72 hours? Are you insane?" No wonder you both look like you're about to fall over. We don't need much sleep, Sky said quickly. Our condition allows us to function on less rest than normal people. Your condition? Another glance between the sisters. Part of what makes us effective guardians, Jade explained carefully. But even we have limits. Easton, who had been listening with the intense focus of a child eavesdropping on adult secrets, suddenly perked up. Dad, remember when I tried to stay awake for 3 days straight last summer? You said I was so loopy, I tried to brush my teeth with a banana. Despite everything, Dorian found himself smiling at the memory. Easton had been determined to break some imaginary world record for sleeplessness and had lasted exactly 36 hours before collapsing face first into his cereal bowl. You also insisted the mailman was actually a robot sent to steal our electricity bill. He might have been, Easton said solemnly. We never proved he wasn't. The comment drew the first genuine smiles Dorian had seen from the twins. Jade's entire face transformed when she smiled, the otherworldly intensity softening into something warm and almost familiar. Sky's smile was quieter but no less genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that made her look years younger. You have your father's sense of humor, Jade told Easton. And your mother's kind heart, Sky added softly. The comment hung in the air. Like a bell that had been rung, its meaning reverberating through the quiet cafe. Dorian felt his chest tighten. You talk about Sarah like you knew her. Jade started, then stopped, glancing at the folder. It's complicated. Most things worth knowing are, Dorian replied. But right now, I'm more concerned with making sure you don't collapse from exhaustion. Whatever's in that folder has waited this long. It can wait until morning. He stood and began clearing the empty soup bowls, his movements brisk and purposeful. The apartment upstairs has a spare room. It's not much, just a twin bed and a dresser. But it's warm and dry, and the door locks if that makes you feel safer. You don't have to, Sky began. Yes, I do, Dorian interrupted gently. Look, I don't know what any of this means yet. Guardian angels, military files, watching over me, it's all beyond my understanding right now. But I know exhaustion when I see it, and I know what basic human decency looks like. You're staying the night. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. The twins stared at him with identical expressions of surprise, as if kindness without strings attached was a foreign concept. It occurred to Dorian that maybe for them, it was. We're used to sleeping rough, Jade said quietly. We don't want to impose on your hospitality. You're not imposing, Easton chimed in, bouncing slightly in his chair. We never have visitors. This is like having a sleepover, except with angels instead of my friends from school. Guardian angels, Sky corrected automatically, then seemed to realize what she'd said. Allegedly. Allegedly, Dorian agreed, though something in his gut told him the distinction mattered. Come on, let me show you the room. He led them up the narrow staircase to the apartment above the cafe. It was a modest space, a living room with a couch that had seen better decades, a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people, and 2 bedrooms connected by a bathroom with vintage fixtures that actually worked. The spare room had been Sarah's office once upon a time, back when she'd taught elementary school and brought home lesson plans to grade. Now it housed a single bed, a small dresser, and boxes of memories Dorian hadn't been able to sort through. Yet, it's not the Ritz, he said, flicking on the overhead light. But the mattress is decent, and there are extra blankets in the closet. Jade ran her fingers along the dresser's surface, stopping at a framed photograph that had somehow escaped being packed away. It showed Sarah at her classroom door on the first day of school, wearing a bright yellow dress and a smile that could have powered the entire town. Behind her, a bulletin board declared, "Welcome to 2nd grade," in cheerful, multicolored letters. She was beautiful, Jade said softly. She was, Dorian agreed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. And stubborn and brilliant and terrible at math. but excellent at making everyone around her feel like they mattered. Sky moved to stand beside her sister, both of them studying the photograph with an intensity that made Dorian uncomfortable. "She looks familiar," Sky murmured. "Familiar how?" The twins exchanged another look. "Dreams," Jade said finally. "Sometimes our dreams show us people we're meant to protect. People who matter to those we guard." The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Dorian was too tired to press for details. The emotional weight of the evening was catching up with him, settling in his bones like winter fog. "There are towels in the bathroom cabinet," he said instead. "Help yourselves to whatever you need. The door downstairs locks automatically when it closes, so you don't need to worry about security." "Thank you," Sky said, and for the first time since they'd walked into his cafe, she sounded like a young woman, accepting kindness rather than a soldier completing a mission. Dorian nodded and turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Whatever brought you to Copper Ridge, whatever's in that folder downstairs, I'm glad you found us." He didn't wait for a response, pulling the door closed behind him and heading to his own room where Easton was already in his pajamas, teeth brushed and ready for bed. The boy's eyes were bright with excitement despite the late hour. "Dad, do you really think they're angels?" Dorian sat on the edge of Easton's bed, a nightly ritual they'd maintained since Sarah's death. "I think they're people who've been through things we can't imagine, and they need a safe place to rest. But they could be angels too, right? Like people angels?" "Maybe," Dorian admitted. "Would that scare you?" Easton considered this seriously. "No, I think it would be cool. We could use some guardian angels around here." The simple faith in his son's voice made Dorian's chest ache. At 10, Easton still believed in magic and miracles, in the possibility that extraordinary things could happen to ordinary people. Sometimes Dorian envied that faith. Most of the time, he tried to protect it. "Get some sleep, buddy. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." As Dorian turned off the lights and settled into his own bed, he found himself listening to the sounds of the old buildings settling around them. For the first time in months, the creaks and sighs didn't sound lonely. They sounded like a house learning to hold more people, expanding to accommodate unexpected guests who might, just might, be exactly what his small family needed. Downstairs, the manila folder waited on the cafe table, its secrets sealed in manila paper and official stamps. But tonight, that could wait. Tonight, for the first time since Sarah's death, Dorian fell asleep knowing there were other people under his roof, other heartbeats sharing the space he'd protected so carefully. And if those people happened to be guardian angels, well, maybe Easton was right. Maybe they could use a little divine intervention. The last thing Dorian heard before sleep claimed him was the soft murmur of voices from the room down the hall. Two women talking in low tones. Their words too quiet to make out, but their presence oddly comforting. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight they were all safe, warm, and no longer alone. Sometimes he thought drowsily, that was miracle enough. Morning arrived in Copper Ridge, with the hesitant warmth of late autumn sunshine, filtering through the cafes, windows and painting golden rectangles across the wooden floors. Dorian woke to the unfamiliar sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen, soft melodic tones that definitely didn't belong to Easton. For a moment, he lay still, remembering the events of the previous night. Twin soldiers, guardian angels, a mysterious folder full of secrets. In the harsh light of day, it all seemed like an elaborate dream. Then he smelled coffee brewing, real coffee, not the instant stuff he usually settled for, and heard Easton's delighted laughter echoing from downstairs. Dorian pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, running a hand through his disheveled hair before padding barefoot down the stairs. The sight that greeted him in the cafe stopped him mid-step. Jade stood at the espresso machine, coaxing it to life with the practiced ease of someone who understood temperamental equipment. She'd braided her hair back in an intricate pattern that looked almost ceremonial. and she hummed softly as she worked a melody Dorian didn't recognize, but found oddly soothing. Sky sat at Easton's usual table, helping him with what appeared to be a math worksheet. The boy's pencil moved confidently across the page while Sky explained something about fractions using pieces of torn napkin as visual aids. Her voice was patient, gentle, nothing like the military precision from the night before. "Morning, Dad," Easton called out when he spotted Dorian on the stairs. "Jade makes coffee like a wizard, and Sky knows everything about math. Did you know fractions are just numbers that haven't figured out how to be whole yet?" Dorian caught Sky's eye and saw the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That's one way to think about it," he said. "Your espresso machine has personality," Jade observed, patting the ancient contraption affectionately. "It reminds me of the one we had at ... double quotes." She paused, the sentence hanging unfinished. "Well, somewhere we used to work. There was a story there." Dorian realized. Several stories, probably, all wrapped in the careful way both women edited themselves when they spoke. He accepted the cup Jade offered him, inhaling the rich aroma of perfectly brewed coffee. "This is incredible," he said after the first sip. "Where did you learn to make coffee like this?" "Here and there," Jade replied, which wasn't really an answer at all. "We've spent time in a lot of places." Sky looked up from Easton's homework. Jade has a gift with machines. They respond to her touch differently than they do for most people. "It's not magic," Jade said quickly, shooting her sister a warning look. "Just patience and practice." But Dorian had noticed the way the espresso machine hummed more smoothly under Jade's hands, how it seemed to cooperate instead of fighting her like it did with him. Magic or not, there was definitely something unusual happening. "Dad, can they stay for breakfast?" Easton asked hopefully. "Sky said she knows how to make pancakes shaped like animals." Dorian glanced at the twins, noting the way they seemed to defer to him for permission, despite being perfectly capable of making their own decisions. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like," he said. "But I think it's time we talked about that folder." The easy morning atmosphere shifted slightly, tension creeping back into the twins' postures. Jade set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "You're right," she said quietly. "You deserve answers." They gathered around the table where the manila folder still lay, its official seals broken, but its contents unexplored. In the morning light, the documents looked less ominous and more ordinary, just paper and ink, regardless of what secrets they might contain. Sky was the one who opened it, her movements careful and reverent. She withdrew a thick stack of papers, photographs, and what appeared to be official reports. The top document bore a familiar name, Dorian Christopher Thorne, born October 15, 1987, Copper Ridge, Montana. "This is about me," Dorian said, though it wasn't really a question. "About your family," Jade corrected gently. "Going back several generations." She spread out a series of photographs across the table. Black and white images of people Dorian didn't recognize but whose faces held familiar echoes. A man with Dorian's jawline and serious eyes. A woman whose smile reminded him of something he couldn't place. Groups of people standing together, their clothing placing them in different decades. "The Thorne family has a unique legacy," Sky said softly. "For over a century, members of your bloodline have possessed the ability to influence certain outcomes, small things, mostly. Preventing accidents, being in the right place at the right time, making connections that change lives." Dorian stared at the photographs. "You're talking about luck." "We're talking about destiny," Jade replied. "Your great-great-grandfather saved 17 people from a train derailment in 1923. He shouldn't have been anywhere near the tracks that day, but something drew him there. Your grandfather talked a young man out of joining a gang in 1962. That man went on to become a teacher who influenced hundreds of lives. And your father," Sky added quietly, convinced a depressed teenager not to jump from the Millfield Bridge in 1985. That teenager grew up to become Dr. Sarah Chun, who saved countless lives during her career as a pediatric surgeon. The name hit Dorian like a physical blow. Sarah Chun. My wife was Sarah Chun before we married. She was meant to be part of your story, Jade said gently. Just as Easton is. Just as everyone you've touched and helped has been. Easton had abandoned his homework entirely, his eyes wide as he processed the implications. Are you saying my family is magic? Not magic, Sky said carefully, but connected to something larger. The ability runs in bloodlines, usually manifesting in small ways. A tendency to be in the right place at the right time. An instinct for helping people at crucial moments. What some might call intuition or luck. Dorian picked up one of the photographs, a young man who could have been his twin, standing beside a woman who looked remarkably like Jade and Sky. The resemblance was unmistakable, unsettling. Who are they? He asked. The twins exchanged another of their loaded glances. Your great-grandfather David Thorne, Jade said finally, and his guardians, our predecessors. Predecessors? Guardian angels aren't born, Sky explained softly. They're chosen. Selected from those who died in service to others, given a second chance to continue protecting those who make a difference in the world. The cafe fell silent except for the steady tick of the old clock above the counter. Dorian set down the photograph with trembling fingers. You're saying you're dead? We were, Jade said simply. Sky and I died together in 2019. We were EMTs responding to a multi-car accident during a blizzard. We managed to save 3 people before the bridge collapsed. We woke up somewhere else, Sky continued. Somewhere bright and warm, where voices told us we could choose. Rest or return with a purpose. Continue the work we'd started in life, but on a different scale. Eston reached across the table and touched Sky's hand with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Do you feel dead? Sky smiled, the first truly unguarded expression Dorian had seen from her. No, sweetheart. We feel very much alive. Different, but alive. Why us? Dorian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why my family? Because you matter, Jade said simply. Because the small kindnesses you perform, the lives you touch, they ripple outward in ways you can't imagine. Your great-grandfather's 17 people went on to have families, careers, influence. One of them invented a water purification system that saved thousands of lives. Another became a diplomat who prevented 3 wars. And Sarah, Sky added gently, she saved the life of a little girl who grew up to become a researcher working on climate solutions. The man your grandfather helped off the streets taught reading to over 2,000 adults during his 40-year career. Dorian felt overwhelmed, as if the weight of generations was settling on his shoulders. What about me? What am I supposed to do with all this? What you've always done, Jade replied. Live with kindness. Make space for people who need it. Trust your instincts when they tell you someone needs help. Like opening your door to 2 strange women claiming to be guardian angels. Sky added with a hint of humor. Despite everything, Dorian found himself smiling. Yeah, like that. The morning light continued to stream through the cafe windows, but something fundamental had shifted in the space between them. They were no longer strangers sharing shelter from a storm. They were people connected by purpose, by mystery, by the strange gravity that pulls certain souls together when the universe decides they belong in each other's stories. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Dorian felt like he might be part of something larger than his own grief, something that extended beyond the small borders of his carefully constructed life. 3 days passed like pages turning in a book Dorian had never expected to read. The twins had settled into the spare room with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to making temporary spaces feel like home, though nothing about their presence felt temporary to him. They moved through the cafe and apartment with an otherworldly grace, leaving subtle improvements in their wake, the espresso machine purring like a contented cat, the ancient cash register that had jammed for months suddenly working perfectly. The loose floorboard by the kitchen door mysteriously tightened without anyone touching it. By Wednesday morning, they had established an unspoken routine. Dorian woke to find Jade already in the cafe kitchen, preparing what she called proper breakfast with ingredients that seemed to multiply in their pantry. Sky helped Easton with his homework at the corner table, her patient explanations transforming math from a dreaded chore into something approaching adventure. And Dorian found himself looking forward to these mornings in a way he hadn't anticipated anything in years. "The Hendersons are coming in for their usual," Dorian announced, watching an elderly couple approach the cafe door. "Fair warning, Mrs. Henderson has opinions about everything and the social filter of a caffeinated toddler." Jade smiled, adjusting her borrowed apron. "I think we can handle one opinionated elderly woman." "You say that now," Easton called from his table. "But wait until she asks if you're single and why you're not married yet. She asked Dad that yesterday, and he turned red as a tomato." The bell above the door chimed as Harold and Margaret Henderson shuffled inside, Harold supporting his wife's elbow with the careful attention of 60 years of marriage. They were Copper Ridge institutions. He'd run the hardware store until retirement. She'd taught Sunday school at 3 different churches and knew everyone's business better than they did themselves. "Good morning, Harold, Mrs. Henderson," Dorian called from behind the counter. "The usual?" "2 black coffees and a bran muffin to split," Harold confirmed, settling his wife at their preferred table by the window. Margaret's sharp eyes immediately fixed on Jade, who was wiping down the espresso machine with focused attention. "Well now, who's this pretty thing?" "Don't recognize her, and I know everyone in a 50-mile radius." "These are my friends, Jade and Sky Reed," Dorian said carefully. "They're visiting for a while. Twins." Margaret exclaimed with delight. "Harold, look, twins. Identical as 2 peas in a pod. Where are you girls from?" Jade and Sky exchanged one of their looks. It was Sky who answered, moving closer to the table with a warm smile. "We've been traveling for work. Dorian was kind enough to offer us a place to stay." "What kind of work has you traveling together?" Margaret asked with the relentless curiosity of a woman who'd made information gathering her life's hobby. "Emergency services," Jade replied smoothly. "We're between assignments." It wasn't technically a lie, Dorian realized. Guardian angels probably counted as emergency services in some cosmic sense. Margaret nodded approvingly. "Good work that. Noble calling. Harold, remember when the paramedics saved your life after that heart attack?" "Angels, every one of them." Harold grunted agreement, accepting his coffee from Dorian with a grateful nod. But Dorian noticed how Jade's hand trembled slightly as she served Margaret's muffin, and how Sky's smile became fixed when the older woman mentioned angels. "You girls look familiar," Margaret continued, studying their faces with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "Can't place where I might have seen you, but I never forget a face." "We have one of those faces," Sky said lightly. "People often think they recognize us." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tom Brennan, who owned the garage 2 blocks over and survived primarily on caffeine and stubborn determination. He stomped through the door like a man declaring war on the morning, his coveralls already stained with motor oil despite the early hour. "Dorian, I need the strongest thing you've got," he announced. "Been up all night with the Morrison kids' truck. Engines possessed by demons, I swear. I swear." Jade looked up from the espresso machine. "What kind of demons?" Tom blinked, apparently noticing the twins for the first time. "Well, hello there. Don't think we've met, Tom Brennan." He wiped his hand on his coveralls before extending it. "Jade Reed, and that's my sister Sky. What's wrong with the truck?" "Everything that can go wrong," Tom replied with the weary tone of a man who'd fought and lost many battles with rebellious machinery. Won't start, won't stay running when it does start. Makes noises that sound like a dying whale. Kid needs. If for work, but I'm about ready to recommend an exorcism. Mind if we take a look? Sky asked, surprising everyone. Tom raised an eyebrow. You know engines? We know a little about fixing things, Jade said modestly. A little? Easton piped. Up from his corner. Jade made our espresso machine purr like a kitten, and it usually sounds like it's plotting revenge. Dorian shot his son a warning look, but Tom was already perking up with interest. Yeah? Well, can't hurt to have another set of eyes on it. Truck's at the garage if you want to swing by later. We'd be happy to help, Sky said, and Dorian caught the genuine enthusiasm in her voice. After the morning rush died down and the last customer departed, Dorian found himself alone with the twins for the first time since breakfast. Jade was reorganizing the supply closet with the systematic precision of someone who understood the importance of order, while Sky taught Easton how to fold napkins into origami flowers. You don't have to fix every broken thing in town, Dorian said quietly. Jade paused in her organizing. It's what we do. Help people, fix problems, prevent small disasters from becoming big ones, Sky added, showing Easton how to crease a pedal. It's not just our assignment, it's who we are. Assignment? Every guardian is given specific duties, Jade explained. Usually it's protecting one person or family. Sometimes it's broader watch over a community, prevent certain events, guide people toward choices that serve the greater good. Dorian felt a chill. What's your assignment regarding me? The twins exchanged another look, this one heavy with something that might have been reluctance. To keep you and Easton safe, Sky said finally. To make sure you continue the work your family has always done. What work? I run a coffee shop. You create sanctuary, Jade corrected. You offer shelter to people who need it. You listen without judgment, provide comfort without asking for anything in return. Do you know how many people have changed their life's direction sitting at these tables? Dorian shook his head. 17 in the 3 years since you opened, Sky said. People who came in here lost, scared, ready to give up, and left with renewed purpose because you treated them with kindness when they needed it most. That's just being decent. That's exactly the point, Jade said softly. In a world that often forgets decency, you make it look effortless, natural, like breathing. Easton looked up from his napkin flowers, his young face serious. Are you going to stay forever? The question hung in the air like incense. Dorian realized he'd been wondering the same thing but hadn't dared ask. As long as we're needed, Sky said gently. As long as you'll have us, Jade added, meeting Dorian's eyes directly. That afternoon, they walked to Tom's garage together, all four of them, like a family heading out for an adventure. Easton skipped ahead, pointing out landmarks and chattering about his upcoming science project. The twins flanked Dorian, their presence somehow making the familiar streets feel different, charged with possibility. The Morrison truck sat in Tom's bay like a defeated giant, its hood raised in surrender. Tom stood beside it, hands on his hips, shaking his head in bewilderment. She's all yours, he announced. I've tried everything short of ritual sacrifice. Jade approached the engine with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. She placed her hands on the manifold, closing her eyes and standing perfectly still. Sky joined her, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed more like dance than diagnosis. After a moment, Jade opened her eyes. Try starting her now. Tom looked skeptical but climbed into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the first try, settling into a smooth, healthy purr. How did you? Tom began. Sometimes engines just need someone to listen to them, Sky said with a smile. But Dorian had seen the way Jade's hands glowed faintly against the metal, had noticed how the twins seemed to communicate with the machine in a language beyond words. Whatever they were, guardian angels or something else entirely. Their abilities extended far beyond luck and intuition. Walking home in the golden afternoon light, Easton chattering excitedly about the miraculous truck repair. Dorian felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The sense of being part of something larger than himself. Something that extended beyond the careful boundaries of grief and survival. For the first time in 3 years, he was building rather than just maintaining. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like coming home. That evening, after Easton had gone to bed with his head full of truck engines and origami flowers, Dorian found himself on the cafe's back porch with Jade and Sky. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the stars above Copper Ridge sparkled with a clarity that city dwellers never experienced. Steam rose from 3 mugs of hot cocoa apiece offering Dorian had prepared when he noticed the twins standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the night with expressions that suggested they were seeing more than darkness. "You don't have to tell me," Dorian said quietly, settling into the worn wooden chair Sarah had painted bright blue the summer before she got sick. "But I get the feeling there's more to your story than emergency services and divine assignments." Jade wrapped her hands around her mug, the warmth seeming to ground her in the present moment. Most people aren't ready for the whole truth. Most people didn't have their entire understanding of reality rewritten over breakfast 3 days ago. Dorian replied with a rueful smile. "I think I'm past worrying about ready." Sky drew her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller in the oversized sweater she'd borrowed from Sarah's closet. "We weren't always twins," she said softly. Dorian blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "In life we were just partners," Jade explained. "Jade Martinez and Sky Chun. We met during EMT training in Seattle, became best friends, then partners. We worked together for 6 years before ... She gestured vaguely at herself. "Before this. The night we died, there was a storm," Sky continued, her voice taking on the distant quality of someone reliving painful memories. "Worse than anything the weather service had predicted. We got called to a pileup on the Aurora Bridge, 5 cars, including a family with 3 young kids. The first car was easy," Jade said. "Businessman with a broken arm and a massive ego. The second car had a teenage couple, shaken up but fine. But the third car..." She trailed off, staring into her cocoa as if it held answers. "Family of 5, Sky finished. Parents in front, 3 kids in back. The youngest was maybe 4 years old, and she had this little stuffed elephant clutched in her arms. The impact had damaged her car seat, and she was scared, crying for her mama." Dorian felt his chest tighten. Any story involving scared children hit differently now that he was a father. "We got the parents out first," Jade continued. "Dad had a concussion. Mom had some internal bleeding but was conscious. Then we went back for the kids. The older 2 were okay, scared but mobile. But the little one, she was trapped," Sky said quietly. "Part of the dashboard had crushed her legs. We could hear the bridge groaning, knew it wasn't stable, but we couldn't just leave her." "Bridge was rated for the load," Jade added bitterly. "Should have held. But 30 years of deferred maintenance and a freak storm." She shrugged. "Sometimes infrastructure fails at the worst possible moment." Dorian set down his mug, understanding flooding through him. "You stayed with her." "We got her out," Sky said firmly. "Cut through the metal, extracted her carefully. Made sure she wasn't paralyzed. Jade carried her while I secured the parents and older children on the far side of the bridge. But by then, the supports were failing," Jade said. "We could feel it moving under our feet. Sky made it to safety with the family, but I was still on the bridge when it started to collapse. So I went back for her," Sky said simply. The words hung in the cool night air like a prayer. Dorian could picture it, one woman choosing to run toward danger instead of away from it, choosing love over survival in a split-second decision that defined everything about who she was. "We fell together," Jade said softly, holding hands. It wasn't a bad way to die, honestly. We saved 5 people, including a little girl who grew up to become a pediatric nurse. She saved hundreds of children in the 16 years since that night. When we woke up, Sky continued, we were standing in this place that felt like sunlight made solid. And there were voices, not human voices, but something older, warmer. They told us we could rest, that we'd earned peace, or ... Or we could choose to continue the work, Jade finished. Together, always together, watching over people who make a difference. People whose small acts of kindness ripple outward in ways they never know. Dorian found his voice with effort. Why twins? Why? Make you identical? Identical? Because guardian angels work in pairs when the assignment is particularly important, Sky explained. And making us identical helps us blend in, draws less attention. People see twins and think unusual but explainable instead of supernatural. Intervention. Plus, Jade added with a small smile, it means we never have to be alone. Death taught us how precious partnership is. The admission hit Dorian like a physical blow. Partnership. The thing he'd lost when Sarah died. The thing he'd convinced himself he didn't need anymore because needing it hurt too much. I understand, he said quietly. Not the dying part, obviously. But the partnership. Sarah and I, we were like that. Complete thoughts for each other, you know? She'd start a sentence and I'd finish it. She'd worry about something and I'd already be solving it. You miss that, Sky observed gently. Every damn day, Dorian admitted, the words coming easier than they had in months. People kept telling me I was strong for moving on, for raising Easton alone, for building a new life. But the truth is, I didn't move on. I just survived. Built walls around the grief and called it healing. Jade leaned forward in her chair. What was she like? Really like, beyond the saint everyone makes her into after death? The question surprised a laugh out of Dorian. Sarah? She was terrible at keeping houseplants alive. Sang off-key in the shower every morning, and could never remember where she put her keys. She cried at commercials but stayed dry-eyed through horror movies. She put ketchup on everything, including pizza, which should have been grounds for divorce. But? Sky prompted, smiling. But she saw possibility in everyone, Dorian said softly. Students who'd given up on themselves, parents who thought they were failing, strangers who just needed someone to listen. She'd come home from school with stories about breakthrough moments, kids learning to read, shy students finding their voices, bullies discovering empathy. She believed people were fundamentally good, even when they forgot it themselves. Like you do, Jade said quietly. I'm not. You are, Sky interrupted gently. Do you know what Tom Brennan told his wife after we fixed his truck? He said meeting you changed his perspective on asking for help. Said you never made him feel stupid for not knowing something. And Mrs. Henderson has been telling everyone in town that you're raising Easton to be a gentleman, Jade added. She said most single fathers let their boys run wild, but you're teaching him kindness. Dorian felt heat creep up his neck. I'm just trying not to screw him up too badly. That's what good parents do, Sky said. They worry about screwing up, which means they care enough to try their best. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Dorian found himself thinking about the little girl with the stuffed elephant, about the ripple effects of one moment of courage, about the way love could transform into purpose even after death. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Of course, Jade replied. This assignment, watching over me and Easton, is it just duty? Or is there something else? The twins exchanged one of their looks, this one heavy with something that might have been longing. Every guardian angel has one assignment that matters more than the others, Sky said carefully. One family that feels personal instead of professional. You're ours, Jade added softly. When we were given this posting, when we saw your file, and learned about Sarah ... It felt like coming home to something we'd never had. We never had families of our own, Sky explained. No siblings, no children, parents who died young. We had each other and our work, but never the kind of everyday love that builds slowly over years. Being here, Jade said, gesturing toward the cafe in the apartment above. Watching Easton do homework, making coffee in the morning, sitting on this porch talking about real things. It's the closest we've ever come to understanding what we were protecting all those years. Dorian felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of muscles he'd held tight for too long. You're not just guarding us, you're learning from us. Learning what it means to belong somewhere, Sky confirmed. What it feels like to wake up and know people will be happy to see you. To matter in small daily ways instead of just crisis moments, Jade added. For the first time since Sarah's death, Dorian felt the walls around his heart crack open. Just a little. Not enough to hurt, but enough to let light in. These women angels, guardians, whatever they were, understood loss in a way that didn't require explanation. They knew what it meant to build purpose from grief, to find meaning in service, to choose love even when it came with the risk of loss. Well, he said finally, for what it's worth, you're both welcome here as long as you want to stay. Assignment or no assignment. The smiles that answered him were radiant, transforming their faces from otherworldly beautiful to something warmer, more human. More like family. The knock came at dawn on a Friday morning, sharp and authoritative in a way that immediately set Dorian's nerves on edge. He'd been up early, unable to sleep after a restless night filled with dreams of falling bridges and voices calling his name from places he couldn't reach. The twins were already awake. They seemed to require less sleep than normal, people quietly preparing breakfast in the cafe kitchen while Easton slumbered peacefully upstairs. Dorian peered through the cafe's front window and felt his stomach drop. Two figures stood on his doorstep, a woman in a crisp federal agent's uniform and a man in military dress blues. Both wore expressions that suggested this wasn't a social call. Jade, Sky, he called softly, his voice tight with warning. We have a problem. The twins appeared instantly at his side, moving with the fluid coordination that had become second nature to them. When they saw the officials outside, their faces went perfectly blank, the kind of careful neutrality that came from years of training and recent experience with authority figures who asked uncomfortable questions. Federal agents, Sky murmured, her voice so quiet only Dorian could hear. And military intelligence, if I'm reading the insignia correctly. The woman knocked again, louder this time. Mr. Thorne? We need to speak with you about your house guests. Dorian's hands shook as he unlocked the door. Good morning. How can I help you? The woman flashed a badge and ID too quickly for him to read the details. Agent Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Colonel Brooks from Military Intelligence. We understand you're currently housing two women who go by the names Jade and Sky Reed. They're friends visiting from out of town, Dorian said carefully, stepping slightly in front of the twins. Is there a problem? Colonel Brooks consulted a tablet, his weathered face grim. Mr. Thorne, we have reason to believe these women are using false identities. Our records show that Jade Martinez and Sky Chun, whose descriptions match your guests exactly, died in Seattle 6 years ago. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dorian felt the twins tense behind him, their breathing so carefully controlled it was almost inaudible. That's impossible, Dorian said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. They're standing right here. Agent Carter stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Jade and Sky with laser focus. We'd like to speak with them directly, if you don't mind. There are some questions about their current legal status, their means of identification, and how they came to be in possession of classified military documents. Dorian's blood turned to ice. The manila folder. Someone had traced it back to them. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Jade said, stepping out from behind Dorian with calm dignity. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Starting with your real names, Colonel Brooks said curtly, and an explanation for how two dead women managed to obtain current military IDs and classified personnel files. Sky moved to stand beside her sister, the two of them presenting a united front. Our identities are complicated, but we haven't done anything illegal. Identity theft is illegal, Agent Carter replied coldly. Possession of classified documents is illegal. And impersonating federal personnel, which these IDs suggest you may have done, is very illegal. From upstairs came the sound of Easton's alarm clock, followed by the thump of small feet hitting the floor. Dorian's protective instincts flared. Whatever was happening here, his son didn't need to be part of it. My son is getting ready for school, he said firmly. Whatever this is about, can we handle it without involving a 10-year-old? That depends, Agent Carter replied, on how cooperative your guests are willing to be. Dad? Easton's voice drifted down the stairs, still thick with sleep. Who's here so early? Just some people who need directions, Dorian called back, hoping his voice sounded normal. Get dressed for school, buddy. I'll have breakfast ready. In a minute, Colonel Brooks lowered his voice. Mr. Thorne, I understand this situation is unusual, but we need these women to come with us for questioning. There are significant national security concerns at play here. What kind of concerns? Dorian demanded. The classified documents they possess contain information about a highly sensitive military program, Agent Carter explained. Information that could compromise ongoing operations if it fell into the wrong hands. Jade and Sky exchanged one of their wordless looks, this one heavy with resignation and something that might have been fear. We understand your position, Sky said quietly. But there are things about this situation that can't be explained through normal channels. Try us, Colonel Brooks challenged. Before either twin could respond, Easton came bounding down the foggy stairs, fully dressed but with his hair sticking up in several directions. He stopped short when he saw the federal agents, his young face cycling through confusion, curiosity, and concern. Dad, are Jade and Sky in trouble? He asked with the directness of childhood. No, sweetheart, Jade said gently, kneeling to Easton's level. These people just need to understand some things about us. Agent Carter watched the interaction with sharp eyes. You've grown quite attached to these women, haven't you, son? Easton nodded solemnly. They're family now. They help Dad with the cafe, and they make the best pancakes, and Sky knows everything about math. And they're guardian angels, he added matter-of-factly, as if this explained everything. The federal agents exchanged glances. Guardian angels? Agent Carter repeated. Easton has an active imagination, Dorian said quickly. Do I? Easton asked, looking confused. But they told us they died saving people, and now they protect our family because we're important somehow. The silence that followed was deafening. Agent Carter and Colonel Brooks stared at the twins with expressions that suggested they were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about this case. Perhaps, Colonel Brooks said slowly, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. No, Dorian said firmly, stepping protectively in front of his son. Whatever you need to discuss with Jade and Sky, you can discuss it here. They're not going anywhere. Mr. Thorne, you don't understand the gravity of what? Dorian interrupted, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. Two women who've done nothing but help my family in this community. Two people who've shown more kindness and integrity in 1 week than most people manage in a lifetime. Agent Carter's expression softened slightly. Mr. Thorne, I understand you feel loyalty to these women. But if they're who our records suggest they are, then something very unusual is happening here. Something that could have implications far beyond your family. Then maybe, Sky said. Quietly, It's time you learned about some of the things your agencies don't put in their official reports. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small silver pendant that seemed to catch and reflect light in impossible ways. As she held it up, the pendant began to glow with a soft, warm radiance that filled the cafe like captured starlight. Jesus Christ, Colonel Brooks whispered, his military composure cracking. Agent Carter stared at the pendant, then at the twins, her professional skepticism warring with the evidence of her own eyes. What the hell are you? Exactly what we've always told you, Jade said simply. Guardian angels assigned to protect Dorian and Easton Thorne. And right now, you're threatening the very people we're sworn to guard. The glow from the pendant intensified, and suddenly the cafe was filled with a presence that felt vast and ancient and utterly benevolent. The federal agents stumbled backward, their faces filled with awe and something approaching terror. This is impossible, Agent Carter breathed. No, Easton said seriously, taking Jade's free hand in his own. It's just different from what you're used to. But impossible things happen all the time when you love people enough. And in that moment, with light spilling through the windows and the pendant's glow warming their faces, Dorian understood that whatever came next, whatever these agents wanted or demanded, he would stand with Jade and Sky. They had become his family, his guardians, his partners in the strange and wonderful work of creating sanctuary for people who needed it. The test had come, and he had already chosen his side. The pendant's glow filled the cafe for exactly 30 seconds before fading, leaving behind a silence so profound that even the ancient building seemed to hold its breath. Agent Carter and Colonel Brooks stood frozen in the doorway, their faces pale and their professional composure thoroughly shattered. Easton still held Jade's hand, completely unbothered by the supernatural display he'd just witnessed, as if guardian angels revealing themselves was just another Tuesday morning in Copper Ridge. Dorian felt something fundamental shift inside him, not fear, but fierce protectiveness. These women had shown him and his son nothing but kindness, had brought light back into their lives when he'd forgotten what hope felt like. Whatever the government wanted with them, whatever bureaucratic nightmare was about to unfold, he would not let them face it alone. I think, he said quietly, you should leave now. Agent Carter found her voice first. Mr. Thorne, you don't understand what you're dealing with here. If these individuals are what they claim to be, there are protocols, procedures, for arresting guardian angels? Dorian asked, his voice gaining strength. What's the federal protocol for that, exactly? Colonel Brooks stepped forward, his military bearing rigid with authority. Mr. Thorne, regardless of what we just witnessed, these women are in possession of classified materials. That's a matter of national security. Those files contained information about my family, Dorian replied firmly. Information I had a right to know. They didn't steal anything. They shared knowledge that belonged to me. That's not how classification works, Dad. Easton tugged on Dorian's sleeve, his young face serious. Should I call Mrs. Henderson? She said if anyone ever bothered our family, the whole town would want to know about it. The suggestion was innocent enough, but Dorian caught the strategic implications immediately. Margaret Henderson was Copper Ridge's unofficial communications network. One phone call from her could have half the town gathered in the cafe within an hour. That's a good idea, buddy, Dorian said, never taking his eyes off the federal agents. Why don't you go do that? Easton bounded toward the old rotary phone behind the counter, with the enthusiasm of a 10-year-old given an important mission. Agent Carter moved to stop him, but Jade stepped smoothly into her path. I wouldn't, Jade said softly, and though her voice was gentle, there was something in her tone that made the federal agent freeze mid-step. You're interfering with a federal investigation, Agent Carter said, but her voice lacked conviction. We're protecting the family, Sky replied. Which is what guardian angels do, Mrs. Henderson. Easton's voice carried clearly across the cafe. It's Easton Thorne. Some government people are here trying to take Jade and Sky away. And Dad says the town should know about it. Yes, ma'am, they're really angels. No, ma'am, not the kind with wings. Within 15 minutes, the first reinforcements arrived. Tom Brennan pushed through the cafe door like a man prepared for battle, still wearing his grease-stained coveralls from an early morning repair job. Behind him came Harold Henderson, moving faster than Dorian had seen him move in years. And Father Mackenzie from St. Mary's, looking like he'd thrown on his collar and rushed straight from morning prayers. "What's this about federal agents harassing our people?" Tom demanded without preamble. Agent Carter straightened, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "This is official government business, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Official business in my friend's cafe?" Harold asked, his usually mild voice carrying unexpected steel. "Dorian, you want these folks here?" "No," Dorian said simply. "I don't." Father Mackenzie stepped forward, his presence somehow managing to fill more space than his slight frame should have allowed. "Agent Carter, is it? I'm Father Mackenzie. Perhaps you could explain why federal agents are threatening members of my congregation." "We're not threatening anyone," Colonel Brooks said stiffly. "We're investigating a matter of national security." "These two young women?" Father Mackenzie gestured toward Jade and Sky, his tone gentle but firm. "They've done nothing but good. Since arriving in our town, they've helped our people, contributed to our community, shown nothing but kindness and service." "With respect, Father, you don't know who they really are," Agent Carter replied. "I know exactly who they are," came a new voice from the doorway. Margaret Henderson entered with the regal bearing of a woman who'd ruled church committees and town councils for 6 decades. Behind her came what appeared to be half the town: shop owners, retirees, parents with children in tow, even the mail carrier still holding his morning delivery bag. "They're the young women who fixed Tom's truck when he'd given up on it," Margaret continued, advancing into the cafe like a general deploying troops. "They're the ones who helped Sally Morrison when her baby was crying inconsolably. Just touched the child's forehead and he settled right down. They're the people who've brought light back to Dorian's eyes and joy back to young Easton's life." "Mrs. Henderson," Agent Carter began, "you don't understand the complexities, don't I?" Margaret's voice could have cut glass. "Young lady, I've lived in this town for 73 years. I've seen good people and bad people, and I know the difference. These girls are good people. Even if they're not entirely people," Father Mackenzie added quietly, surprising everyone. "I've sensed something different about them since they arrived. Something blessed. If they are what I suspect they are, then this community has been granted a remarkable gift." Agent Carter stared at the priest. "You're saying you believe they're actually guardian angels?" Father Mackenzie smiled peacefully. "Agent Carter, I've been in service to God for 42 years. I've learned to recognize His work in the world, even when it comes in forms that don't fit official policy manuals." Tom Brennan crossed his arms, his mechanic's hands dark with motor oil but steady with purpose. "I don't care if they're angels, aliens, or the Easter Bunny. They helped me when I needed it, and now they need help. That's what community means." "This is highly irregular," Colonel Brooks protested, clearly overwhelmed by the growing crowd of determined townspeople. "So is everything else about this situation," Dorian pointed out. "But irregular doesn't mean wrong." Sky stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded cafe. "We appreciate everyone's support, but we don't want to bring trouble to this town. If going with these agents would keep the community safe, no." The word came from a dozen voices simultaneously, a chorus of refusal that made the federal agents take an involuntary step backward. "You're not going anywhere," Harold Henderson declared with the firmness of a man who'd spent 60 years standing up for what he believed in. "We stand together here," Margaret added, her sharp eyes fixed on the federal agents. That's what Copper Ridge has always done. Agent Carter looked around the cafe, taking in the sea of determined faces, the protective stance of the townspeople, the unwavering support for two women they'd known for barely a week. Her professional training warred with the evidence of her own eyes, not just the supernatural display from earlier, but the genuine love and loyalty these people showed for their self-proclaimed guardian angels. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Yes, it is," Dorian replied quietly. "Because you're going to walk out that door and report that your investigation found nothing of interest in Copper Ridge. You're going to file your paperwork and move on to actual threats to national security. And if we don't," Father Mackenzie smiled serenely, "then you'll find yourself dealing with a community that knows how to make uncomfortable situations very public. The Catholic Church has an excellent network for sharing stories about miraculous events and government overreach. The Hardware Store Owners Association isn't bad at spreading word either," Harold added with a grin. Agent Carter and Colonel Brooks exchanged a long look. Finally, Agent Carter closed her tablet and tucked it under her arm. "This investigation is being classified at the highest levels," she said. "Nothing that happened here today will appear in any official reports." "Good," Margaret Henderson replied briskly. "Now can I offer you some coffee for the road? Jade makes the best espresso in 3 counties." The federal agents declined and left without another word, their black sedan disappearing down Main Street like a bad dream fading in daylight. The cafe erupted in celebration voices overlapping with relief and triumph. Hands clapping backs, children laughing at the excitement they didn't fully understand, but instinctively enjoyed. Through it all, Dorian watched Jade and Sky, seeing the wonder in their faces as they absorbed what had just happened. A community had chosen them, fought for them, stood against federal authority to protect two women they barely knew. For the first time since their arrival, the twins looked truly overwhelmed, not by danger or duty, but by love offered freely and without condition. They were home. And home, Dorian realized, was something worth defending. 3 weeks had passed since the federal agent's visit, and life in Copper Ridge had settled into a new rhythm that felt both extraordinary and perfectly natural. The twins had become fixtures. In the community, Jade could be found most mornings teaching elderly customers how to use their smartphones while brewing perfect espresso, and Sky had somehow become the unofficial tutor for half the town's struggling students. They moved through their days with purpose and joy, but Dorian caught them, sometimes staring out windows with expressions that suggested they were seeing far beyond the Montana horizon. It was on a Thursday evening, while Easton practiced violin upstairs with the dedication of someone who'd recently discovered he had actual talent for music, that everything changed. Dorian was closing the cafe when he noticed Jade standing perfectly still in the middle of the dining area, her eyes closed, and her face tilted toward the ceiling as if listening to something only she could hear. Sky appeared from the kitchen, moving to stand beside her sister with the synchronized precision that had become second nature to them. "What is it?" Dorian asked quietly. Jade opened her eyes, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. "We've received new orders." The words hit Dorian like cold water. "Orders?" "From our superiors," Sky explained, her voice carefully neutral. "There's been a development in Denver. A family there is facing immediate danger, and we're being reassigned." Dorian felt the world tilt slightly. He'd known this moment might come, had told himself he was prepared for it, but preparation meant nothing when faced with the reality of losing them. "When?" "Tonight," Jade said softly. "We're supposed to leave within the hour." From upstairs, Easton's violin fell silent. A moment later, they heard his footsteps on the stairs, followed by his voice calling down. "Dad, is everything okay? You guys sound weird." Dorian looked at the twins, seeing his own heartbreak reflected in their faces. "We need to tell him." Easton appeared at the bottom of the stairs, violin still in hand, his 10-year-old instincts already picking up on the tension in the room. "Tell me what?" Sky knelt to his level, her voice gentle but steady. "Easton, we've received new assignments. We have to leave Copper Ridge tonight." The boy's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then devastating understanding. "But you're our guardian angels. You're supposed to guard us." "There are other people who need us now," Jade explained carefully. "A family in immediate danger." "More danger than we're in?" Easton asked with the brutal logic of childhood. The twins exchanged one of their looks, this one heavy with conflict. It's not about levels of danger," Sky said finally. "It's about where we're needed most." Easton set down his violin with careful precision, his young face serious in a way that reminded Dorian painfully of Sarah. "And you need to go because someone told you to." "Because it's our duty," Jade replied. "But what about what you want?" Easton pressed. "What about what we want?" The simple question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they understood about duty and choice. Dorian found himself holding his breath, waiting for an answer he wasn't sure existed. "Easton," Sky said gently, "angels don't always get to choose. But you did choose." Easton interrupted with the clarity that sometimes came from being 10 years old and unencumbered by adult complications. "You chose to save people on that bridge. You chose to become guardian angels instead of resting. You chose to stay here with us, even when the government people wanted to take you away." Jade blinked, as if seeing something for the first time. "We did choose, didn't we?" "Every day," Dorian added quietly, finally understanding what his son was trying to say. "You choose to make pancakes in the morning, to help with homework, to fix broken things around town. Nobody orders you to do those things. Those are just extras," Sky protested weakly. "Small things we do because we're here anyway." "No," Easton said firmly. "Those are the things that make you family. Guardian angels protect people because they have to. Family protects people because they want to." The boy walked over to the twins, taking each of their hands in his own. "Are you our family, or are you just angels doing a job?" The question broke something open in Jade's face. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked at this earnest boy who'd somehow cut straight to the heart of everything they'd been struggling with for weeks. "We're family," she whispered. "We're definitely family." "Then stay," Easton said simply. "Families don't leave each other." Sky looked up at Dorian, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What if there are consequences? What if our superiors don't understand?" Dorian surprised himself by laughing not with humor, but with the sudden clarity that came from making a decision he'd been avoiding for too long. "Then we'll face them together. All four of us." He moved to stand beside his son, placing protective hands on both twins' shoulders. "I'm tired of being afraid of losing people I love. I lost Sarah, and it nearly destroyed me, but you two, you brought us back to life. You made us remember what it feels like to be part of something bigger than just survival." "But the family in Denver," Jade began. "Will have to be protected by someone else," Dorian said firmly. "Because I'm making an executive decision as the head of this household. You're both staying. Not as our guardian angels, but as our family." The cafe fell silent, except for the steady tick of the old clock and the distant hum of traffic on Main Street. Then, slowly, Sky began to smile, the first truly unguarded expression Dorian had seen from her. "You're willing to fight heaven itself to keep us?" she asked. "I'm willing to fight anyone who tries to take you away from us," Dorian replied without hesitation. That's when it happened, the breakthrough none of them had seen coming. The air in the cafe shimmered, and suddenly they weren't alone. A presence filled the space, warm and vast and unmistakably benevolent, carrying with it a sense of approval that felt like sunlight warming their souls. A voice spoke, not audibly but directly into their hearts. "Choice made in love supersedes duty made in obligation." The family chooses correctly. The presence faded as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a peace so profound that even Easton seemed to understand something momentous had just occurred. "Did that just happen?" Jade whispered. "I think," Sky said slowly, "we just got permission to be human." Easton grinned, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" "It means," Dorian said, pulling all three of them into a fierce hug, "that we're choosing each other. Every day, for as long as we want to." "Which is forever," Jade added, her voice thick with emotion. "Definitely forever," Sky agreed. That night, after Easton had gone to bed practically vibrating with joy, Dorian found himself on the back porch with the twins once again. But this time, the conversation felt different, not like strangers sharing stories, but like family making plans. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to be a family of 4 instead of a man and his son being protected by 2 guardian angels," Jade replied. "We learn how to live for ourselves instead of just for duty," Sky added. "And we probably need to discuss some practical things," Dorian said with a smile. "Like whether guardian angels can legally adopt children, and how to explain to the IRS that my dependents include 2 formerly dead EMTs. The twins burst into laughter, real, unguarded laughter that seemed to surprise them as much as it delighted Dorian. "We'll figure it out," Jade said confidently. "Families always do. Besides," Sky added with a grin, "we have connections in high places." Looking up at the stars above Copper Ridge, Dorian felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Complete and unshakable certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people who belonged with him. They had chosen each other, and somehow, miraculously, the universe had chosen them back. 1 year later, on a crisp October morning that mirrored the day 2 guardian angels had first walked into his life, Dorian Thorne stood in the doorway of what was no longer just his cafe, but their cafe, watching his extraordinary family begin another ordinary day. The changes had been gradual but profound, like watching a garden bloom in time-lapse photography each day, bringing small growth that accumulated into something beautiful and unrecognizable from what had come before. Jade hummed as she prepared the morning's pastries, her movements graceful and sure as she worked with dough that seemed to respond to her touch like a living thing. The recipes were her own now adaptations of classics that somehow tasted like memories of home, even to people who'd never been to the places that inspired them. The espresso machine purred under her care, no longer the temperamental beast that had terrorized Dorian for 3 years, but a willing partner in the daily ritual of creating comfort for their community. Sky sat at the corner table with 3 local high school students, patiently explaining calculus concepts that had baffled their teacher. Her gift for breaking down complex problems into manageable pieces had made her the most sought-after tutor in 3 counties, though she never charged a penny. "Education is a gift," she'd told Dorian when he'd suggested she might start a formal tutoring business. "You don't put a price tag on gifts." Easton, now 11 and somehow taller than seemed possible after just 1 year, practiced violin by the window where the morning light caught the auburn highlights Sarah had given him. His playing had progressed from enthusiastic screeching to something approaching actual music, and the pride on his face when he mastered a difficult passage still made Dorian's chest tight with emotion. The boy had grown more confident, more secure in himself, surrounded by adults who celebrated his quirks instead of trying to correct them. "Dad, listen to this," Easton called, launching into a melody that Dorian recognized as one of Jade's humming songs, now translated into violin notes that soared and dipped like birdsong. "Beautiful, buddy," Dorian replied, meaning it completely. Everything about their life had become beautiful. Even the mundane moments that once felt like mere survival. The legal complications of their unusual family structure had been resolved with surprising ease. A sympathetic family court judge in Billings woman who claimed she'd seen stranger things in her 40 years on the bench, had granted Dorian guardianship of the twins after they'd somehow acquired legal identities that satisfied even the most thorough background checks. Dorian had stopped asking how certain impossible things happened around Jade and Sky. Some mysteries were more comfortable left unsolved. The cafe itself had undergone a transformation as well. Word of their exceptional coffee and the gentle magic that seemed to infuse everything the twins touched had spread far beyond Copper Ridge. They now served travelers from 3 states away, people who made pilgrimages to taste Jade's pastries, or seek Sky's wisdom about problems both mathematical and personal. The twins had a gift for seeing what people needed, sometimes coffee and conversation, sometimes just a moment of peace in a space that felt sacred, despite its humble appearance. Father Mackenzie stopped by every Tuesday for what he called theological discussions, but which looked suspiciously like an elderly priest, enjoying the company of 2 extraordinary young women, who challenged his understanding of divine intervention in the most delightful ways. Margaret Henderson had appointed herself the twins' unofficial social secretary, ensuring they were invited to every community event and frequently attempting to set them up with nice young men, despite their polite insistence that they were. Quite content as they were, the federal agents had never returned. Their official report, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by Tom Brennan out of sheer curiosity, stated simply, "Investigation concluded. No actionable intelligence found. Recommend case closure." Whatever strings had been pulled or whatever higher authorities had intervened, the government's interest in 2 guardian angels had apparently evaporated like morning mist. As the morning rush began, Dorian watched his family work together with the seamless coordination of people who'd found their rhythm. Jade handled the complex orders with graceful efficiency, while Sky managed the register and somehow remembered every regular customer's preferred greeting and personal details. Easton helped by clearing tables and charming elderly customers with his earnest questions about their lives and opinions on everything from weather patterns to the best way to tune a violin. "Mr. Thorne?" Dorian turned to find a young woman standing hesitantly at the counter, a baby carrier in her arms and exhaustion written across her face in lines too deep for someone who couldn't be more than 20-5. Double quotes. "Yes, I heard ... I mean, someone told me that you help people sometimes. People who are having a hard time." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and Dorian could see her hands shaking slightly as she clutched the carrier's handle. Before Dorian could respond, Jade appeared at his elbow with a warm smile and a steaming mug. "Of course we help," she said gently, setting the coffee in front of the young woman without being asked. "That's what family does. I'm Jade, and this is Dorian. What's your name?" "Lisa," the woman said, accepting the coffee with tears threatening to spill over. "Lisa Morrison. And this is my daughter, Emma. We've been sleeping in my car for 3 days, and I don't know where else to go." Dorian felt the familiar stirring in his chest, the recognition of someone who needed sanctuary, the quiet call to action that had become second nature over the past year. But now he wasn't alone in answering it. "Let's get you and Emma somewhere warm," Sky said, materializing beside them with a plate of fresh blueberry muffins. "We have a room upstairs if you need a place to rest." "I can't pay," Lisa began. "Did anyone ask you to?" Easton piped up from behind the register, his 11-year-old indignation at the suggestion that help required payment, making all 4 adults smile despite the circumstances. 3 hours later, Lisa and baby Emma were settled in the small apartment. Above the café, the space that had once been Dorian's guest room, but had become their overflow sanctuary for people who needed more than coffee and conversation. Lisa's car troubles were being handled by Tom Brennan, who declared the engine salvageable with some work and a lot of prayer. Margaret Henderson had arrived with bags of baby clothes, donated by various sources, and a casserole that could feed a small army. Another one finds us, Jade observed that evening as they cleaned up after the dinner rush. They don't find us, Sky corrected gently. We find them. Or maybe we find each other. Dorian nodded, understanding what she meant. The cafe had become something more than a business, or even a home. It was a beacon for people who needed to believe that kindness still existed in the world, that strangers could become family, that broken things could be mended with patience. And love, do you ever miss it? Easton asked suddenly. Being guardian angels instead of just ... US? Jade and Sky exchanged one of their looks, but this one was soft with contentment rather than weighted with secrets. We're still guardian angels, Jade replied. We just guard differently now. We guard with pancakes instead of intervention, Sky added with a grin. With coffee instead of miracles. Though sometimes, Dorian said, watching Lisa rock Baby. Emmett asleep by the window while soft violin music drifted down from upstairs. Those feel like the same thing. That night, as Copper Ridge settled into peaceful slumber under a blanket of stars, the Thorne family, all four of them, gathered on their back porch for their nightly ritual of hot cocoa and quiet conversation. It was a tradition that had evolved naturally, a way of marking the end of each day and acknowledging the gift of being together. What's tomorrow? Easton asked, a question that had become his way of expressing anticipation for whatever ordinary miracles awaited them. Mrs. Patterson wants help with her computer, Jade said. And the Morrison truck should be ready by noon. 3 calculus students coming in after school, Sky added. And Father Mackenzie wants to discuss whether guardian angels technically count as saints for canonization purposes. And Lisa might be ready to talk about what comes next, Dorian concluded. When she's ready. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the darkness, a night owl called to its mate. And somewhere else, a young mother fell asleep knowing her baby was safe and warm for the first time in weeks. I love this, Easton said softly. I love all of this. So do we, Jade and Sky said in unison, their voices harmonizing like a prayer. Dorian pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders and smiled at the night sky. Sarah would have loved this too, he thought, the chaos and joy and constant stream of people who needed help. She would have delighted in Jade's cooking and Sky's patience with struggling students. She would have marveled at the way 2 guardian angels had become. So thoroughly human while remaining thoroughly divine. Thank you, he whispered to the stars, to Sarah, to whatever force in the universe had decided a broken-hearted single father and his son deserved a second chance at family. The stars twinkled back at him like a cosmic wink, and somewhere, in the distance, a church bell chimed midnight, marking the end of another day in a life that had become more beautiful than he'd ever dared to dream. Tomorrow would bring new people who needed sanctuary, new problems to solve, new opportunities to practice the ancient art of loving strangers until they became family. And Dorian Thorne, surrounded by his guardian angels who'd chosen to stay earthbound for love, couldn't wait to see what ordinary miracles awaited them all. In Copper Ridge, Montana, guardian angels made coffee, taught calculus, and proved every single day that the most profound magic was often the simplest. Opening your door to someone who needed shelter, and discovering that in saving them, you'd somehow saved yourself. Sometimes the greatest transformations began with the smallest choices. Sometimes guardian angels were exactly what they appeared to be. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, both could be true at the same time. The end was really just another beginning. And every beginning was a gift wrapped in starlight and served with the perfect cup of coffee. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.